Marcus's near-death experience with anxiety and depression as an NFL athlete led him to establish the Circle of M Foundation, Incorporated, after retiring from football. The Circle of M's mission is to end the negative stigma surrounding mental health and bring awareness to the feelings that cause anxiety and depression. Please give our keynote speaker a round of applause. Hold on, 1 second.
That was a great introduction. Well, once you set that up, I want to talk about, obviously, I always like to pull from my personal experience. And I went to the University of Louisville, obviously out of high school, played there for 4 years, and I go to the league. I played there for 6 years, but through each of my presentations, the things that I talk about, is more so pulling from my own experience, and then also trying to do the work as Dr. Pope is talking about. So when we talk about the learning curve or mental health and concussions, I represent that. So some of the things that you guys were talking about earlier, I could resonate with a lot of the things that you were talking about, because I was the person who was in those seats, in those positions. And I think that it's truly, truly important that we continue to have these conversations, so when we do go to legislative, when we go to the boards, and things of that nature, you have data, you have all the things that you need to combat everything that you're saying. And so that's all this is about. This is just about continuing to create the learning curve, but then also making you aware of the athlete and the athlete. All right, so let me go to the next slide. So we all know what concussions is. All you guys probably know what concussions is. We talk about CDC. Concussion is a type of traumatic brain injury caused by a strike to the head or body that causes the head and brains to move rapidly back and forth. Right? So some of these symptoms, obviously, I experience. We talk about headache, dizziness, and confusion, and changes in memory. Changes in memory was probably one of the most that I experienced. But the saving grace for me was that I played quarterback in high school, right? And when we look at different positions, something that's going to come up next, you'll see like the different positions. But me playing quarterback in high school was my saving grace. I didn't start playing linebacker until I got to college, right? So we understand that quarterbacks, they don't get hit as much. And when they do get hit, now the safety tips are, you can only hit them in this area. You can't hit up here or down below. Well, I know that's how it is in the NFL, and it's trying to trickle down to college and the pros. So when we talk about changes in memory, that was something that really affected me in a way that I started to have cognitive impairment issues when I was done playing. But I'm going to get to that. When we talk about increased processing time, right? I noticed right when I was done playing, when I'm talking to people or I'm saying something to someone, I noticed that it takes me a long time to process my thoughts, right? It takes me a long time to think about what I want to say. And it was just over time of me maybe not saying something if I felt like I was concussed a little bit, right? If I felt that, should I have said something, right? And how many players do we know are maybe out there on the field who have some of these symptoms and not really saying much? Well, we understand that as a player, my job is to play, and I want to be on the field, right? And so if you think about being in the NFL, that thought process trickles all the way down it starts in high school, right? Because the high school players are looking at the college players are looking at the NFL players, and they see them, they're like, I have to do what they're doing. So if they come to the sideline and they feel something, and they know that they're not all the way there, they're going to do whatever it takes to stay in the game. So they're going to finagle the system in whatever way possible. There was plenty of times where you come to the sideline, the whole crowd heard a loud hit. Now in your head, you know, when you hear that, you're like, okay, is this, you know, right? And you're like, is this guy, you need to check on him, right? Come to the sideline, they ask you all these questions. I know all these questions, right? Or you answer the questions quickly, right? So you can get back out there on the field. So that's what it is. And we talk about mood and behavior, right? And personality changes. And I'll get into this a little bit later too as well. My last concussion, I was, like my mother came to see me. She came to see me play in Seattle, right? And I remember literally being super emotional, right? And so when we talk about mood changes, and I forgot who was talking about it earlier. When you talk about mood changes, you can see that in some of your players. You can see that, and you can kind of notice it. And so that's one of the things you can look at. You're like, okay, what is his behavior like, right? And I was just crying. I don't know why I was crying. I was just crying for no reason. I was very emotional, and that's kind of how I knew that I had a concussion, because I remember reading something about mood and behavior. I remember reading something like that, but it wasn't something that was talked about often enough. That's why I feel like, man, what this is super, super beneficial for everyone, especially for the athlete. And I'm just praying that you continue to do that work, because we as athletes need this, because when we get 50 and 60, we want to be here. I have teammates that they're not here. They're not here anymore because some of the things that they suffer after they're done playing the game. You also have to realize that we've been playing since we were 5 years old. I've been playing since I was 5, right? So I don't know any parents in here who have a kid who play football. I'm not trying to get you to stop from him playing, right? I just want you to be aware that, you know, our brains aren't fully developed until we're like 27 or 28 or whatever it may be, right? So I think it's important for them to have a coach or have someone who understands the game and teaches proper technique. So this is a little graph, right? I got this from a Harvard study, right? And it talks about the percentage of former players with cognitive impairment by position and career length, right? So if you look at my position, right, I was a linebacker. I played 6 years. And you see how high the graph is right here, right? I only played linebacker for roughly sophomore year to my last year in the league. So that was probably, I want to say 8 to 9 years. And when I was finished, I was having problems. I was having issues. And I also thought that there was nothing that could be done, because when it comes to the NFL and them talking about concussions, they kind of ignore it, right? They don't want to talk about the deep part of what concussions do to us as athletes. So I always thought, like, dang, am I going to be able to do something? But this also gives you that picture. If you have a high school or a college athlete, you can kind of gauge, okay, if I have a wide receiver, defensive back, right, tight end, what are they looking at when it comes to their cognitive impairment issues? So that's why I put this on here. I think that this is really good to see, because it really helped me out when I was thinking about the treatments and the things that I wanted to do. I needed to understand the statistics first. So my personal experience. All right, so my first concussion was when I was in college. I got moved from quarterback to linebacker. Coaches is like, hey, what do you think about playing linebacker? I'm like, Coach, I want to do whatever it takes for me to get on the field, right? That's all our mindset. We're just trying to get on the field. So I go to linebacker, and then like a couple weeks later, they moved me to DN. So I go quarterback all the way to DN, and I had to gain 30 pounds. Probably the worst thing I've ever did in my life. I just ate any and everything, and I felt terrible, right? But the first day of camp, I'm going up against a 300-pounder. And I'm 220, 230, right? He comes off the ball and it's head-to-head contact. Boom! First concussion. I remember like walking over to the sideline, being super foggy, not realizing where I was, and that was the first time I ever had a concussion. And I remember the concussion protocol. At that time, this was back in 2010, right? The concussion protocol was more so, it wasn't really compact, or what do you call it, compact testing, right? Say that again?
Cognitive.
Yeah, so it wasn't, it wasn't that back then. It was more so, you kind of do it on the field. They ask you the questions like, who is the president? What's your mother's name?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, Scott. So yeah, those questions would be asked, and yes, I was concussed, but I could answer those questions. So I wasn't out that long. I was like, okay, I sat out for maybe 3 days, right? And then I'm back on the field. But really and truly, I should have probably been done for at least 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I should have been out, but I probably still had a concussion. So following that season, I didn't have any more concussions. But then that next year, I had a routine play going against a fullback. And on the scale that I just showed you, running backs also are on there, right? Because you have running backs who go head on with a linebacker all the time. And if you watch a football game, you can see them, they're going head to head all the time. Well, 9 times out of 10, they're not using their pads like how they're supposed to. They're using their helmet, in which the helmet is only there to protect your face. But they're taught to use that as a weapon. Some coaches teach that, right? And so I'm going head up with them. And I remember afterwards, I was very foggy and I didn't know, I kind of really didn't know where I was. But because of my leadership, quote unquote, I didn't say anything to anybody. So how many players are out there just not saying anything? Right? And they could be concussed. They could be, something is going on. And we didn't have those people on the sideline to pull me to the sideline. Hey, you okay? Right? We were just going up against the offense. So now I'm foggy. I have a game on Sunday. So in my mind, I'm thinking like, okay, how can I get to the game on Sunday? Luckily, we had a practice where we didn't have any pads or anything like that. So I was able to get to the game, but I wasn't still in my right mind, right? And so after that, obviously she talked a little bit about me getting drafted in the first round, right? So a lot of these issues that I had, so I had anxiety and depression issues before the concussions. So you think about how you mirror mental health and concussions, right? I had some of those issues before I had concussions, right? Family, my parents getting a divorce, being a kid when I was 8, all of those things. So now all of the baggage that I've had over the course of the years that I've never talked about, never released to anybody, right? I didn't have a therapist. That's not something that our community, that's not something that we believe in, right? We're still trying to get, man, my dad, oh man, I'm still trying to get him to understand how to be vulnerable, right? And that's a hard thing. That's a hard thing. So I'm going into the league. I have all this baggage, and I go to the Philadelphia Eagles, where the fans are like, they don't really care that much about you, right? That's the truth. That's the truth. You know, they don't really care that much about you, right? They want to see you perform, right? They want to see you perform. And so think about having to perform, right? Having to perform for your coaches. You're not performing well. I didn't perform well, right? And then also having to deal with some of the stressors of family. That's a lot in a nutshell. And I'm the first one in my family to ever make it that far. So I didn't have someone that I could pull on to tell me what to expect. So going into the league was actually like a culture shock for me. So I go on 3 years, and I started to have some issues with depression. And now that I'm thinking about it, it's like, could my depression have been from the concussions that I received? And did I stay out long enough? Like, am I having effects of stuff that happened to me in college? I used to think that, like, I don't know anything about concussions, but am I depressed because of this? Like, what is wrong with me? And so being in my room, crying, all of that, trying to figure out, why am I here? Or asking God, like, am I good enough to be here? Because I'm dealing with some of these issues. So I ended up getting cut from the Eagles because I didn't play well there. I had those issues, and quite frankly, when you're playing in the league at that point in time, like, mental health now is more at the front now. But back then, they would use it against you. So if I come out and say, man, I got an issue, I got a problem, coach, they're gonna be like, back in there. You know what I'm saying? Because their job is to get you to play. And you gotta play well. If you don't play well, then their job is on the line.
Okay, so I am talking about playing and impact and concussion assessment. And we heard it talked about already earlier. And so I'm just so full right now. I'm so excited. And I think that this will be helpful because it really is going to encapsulate a lot of what we've already talked about today. But it's going to give you a chance to kind of put a lot of the things we talked about into action in terms of your concussion assessments. So we're going to talk about identifying the elements of, the key elements of academic discourse, where we talk, it's not, you can keep it. We went to it. That's the default canvas, my stuff is not in there. Okay, so first, just talking about sports-related concussion and the symptoms. So we've kind of talked about some of those already, right? We know that there are 3 categories, and that makes concussion a little unique compared to the other areas that we talk about in speech-language pathology, because we have to be aware of the physical symptoms, the psychosocial or behavioral and emotional symptoms, as well as the cognitive communicative symptoms. And what happens a lot of times in concussion education is there's a heavy focus on the physical symptoms, because those are the ones that people can feel, they can see it, they can describe those things. The psychosocial is a little more on the tricky side because people are not always able to understand or be able to communicate what they're feeling, right? And then we have the cognitive communicative symptoms, which are not always talked about, and that is what the area of speech-language pathology focuses on. And the reason it's in a Venn diagram is because they all overlap with each other, right? And we're going to go through some of these different ones, but it's important to know that the physical symptoms can impact a person's behaviors and emotions, and then leading into impacting their cognitive communicative skills. And so what we see immediately with mild TBI or concussion are that we see these post-concussion symptoms, or you might hear it termed as persistent concussion symptoms. What we are concerned about are the long-term issues, right? That we hear about chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And we hear about that a lot in our military, but also in our athletes. So just to give you a list of some of these, they're not really, this is not exhaustive. Headaches are the #1 reported symptom. Some athletes experience headaches for months. I just had a friend of mine that was telling me they had headaches almost every day for 6 months, right? Dizziness, insomnia, fatigue, and there's different types of fatigue. There's physical fatigue and there's mental fatigue. And that's why we can see that sometimes, I think somebody asked earlier about the baseline testing and the symptom monitoring, that they could look fine physically, but then a lot of my athletes are like, yeah, I can get on the treadmill, I can get on the exercise, all the exercise machines, but when I sit in class and I sit down to do my work, my brain just is exhausted. Also, the sensitivity to light and noise, And then sometimes we even see seizures that occur. How many of you, when you have a headache, can do all the things you need to do in a day? Sometimes you're like, I gotta lay down, right? Imagine experiencing that for a long period of time. So then we might see the irritability. We see depression. Depression is common with many types of brain injuries, okay? Anxiety is inhibition. Saying inappropriate things. And I tell my students all the time, it doesn't mean that a person's just being mean and nasty. They could be as polite as they want to be, but they might be saying things that are not appropriate for their time and space. We also see difficulty with emotional control, and that could vary. It could be emotional outbursts of anger. It could be uncontrollable laughing and crying. And then what these also lead into are some challenges in our lives, like in our employment, trying to maintain a job, trying to maintain friendships and relationships, home management, and then school as well. And so for cognitive communication, you hear a lot about 3 areas. I always add social communication, but attention, there are different types of attention. There's the attention you're giving me right now, I hope, where you are paying attention to what I'm giving you in the moment. That's going to be like your focus and sustain. The selective is when that noise starts happening in the back, or somebody comes through talking real loud, and you're trying to weed that out so you can hear me. Alternating is being able to flip back and forth. Okay, so keep thinking about things because it's going to come in handy for you in a little bit. All right, alternating, flipping back and forth, and then divided is like your multitasking, being able to do multiple things at one time. One of our highest forms of divided attention is driving, right? We have to think about a lot of things and focus, and even subconsciously, there's a lot happening when we drive, right? Attention and concentration are a base cognitive skill. That is a foundation where if attention is impaired, it's going to affect every other area. Because if it's hard to pay attention, it's going to be hard to remember things. And then if it's hard to pay attention and to remember, it's going to be challenging to get into these executive functions and all the things you have to do during the day. Trying to problem solve, trying to plan, trying to organize, trying to reason. Because you might not really think about how much you pull information from your memory to be able to make plans and to make decisions and weigh out options and all those different areas, as well as abstract language. Sometimes with brain injury, we see that people have a hard time understanding jokes, producing jokes, and humor, and that's also a very important part of interacting with people around you, which leads us into social communication. Social communication overlaps very heavily with executive functions, but what makes it different is that it involves how we communicate with other people, okay? All right, so let's talk about these student athletes at the different areas or the levels of school. So things look a little different. Some things are similar. For elementary school, we see sports is mostly outside of the school. It's like in the community, right? They all have weekly practices and games. There is little to no baseline testing. Unless there is some organization that has come along and introduced that to the program, but we don't really see it happening. They also may not have return to play protocols. I haven't really ran across many, but maybe the people in the sports world can let me know what that is. But when it comes to what we do as speech pathologists, we do know that they have the opportunity to get an individualized education plan or a 504 plan. And just in case you're not familiar with the difference between those, there is the independent educational plan, or individualized educational plan, is basically when special education and speech pathology, and physical therapy, and occupational and special education teachers, nurses, all kinds of different areas will come together and they will assess a child to see what kind of needs they have and if they need services. The 504 plan is an accommodation plan. So there was a mention earlier about concussion testing and the SLP being involved early because I remember who it was that said the numbers don't lie. And that's very true. The numbers don't lie, but sometimes those numbers still don't show that they are presenting the deficits. And so what will happen in that case is that they qualify for accommodations if you can make a really good impact statement, but they may not qualify for an individualized education plan. When we get to middle school, pretty similar, but baseline, or in high school, baseline concussion testing becomes more frequent. There is a mandate for concussion education and for return to play, but the problem with it is they don't really tell them how they have to implement it. So it could be as simple as they just have a flyer that they pass out at the beginning of the school year, okay? So we also see IEPs and 504 plans. When we get to college though, we have more, the sports are connected to the school, there's still weekly practices and games, but we do have requirements by the NCAA. So they do have to implement baseline testing. They have to have a concussion protocol. Again, it could vary the way that that is implemented. They also have to have a return to play or learn protocol. But what's different at the college level is that IEPs under IDEA does not exist anymore. So there's no special education program in college. The only thing they can get are the accommodations, okay? And so this is a lot of what I do. I am primarily writing reports to help student athletes get accommodations. They can get services if the university has a speech hearing clinic, or if they have connections to a speech and hearing or a speech language pathologist. So the impact statement, we've talked about it a lot. What is it? It's basically a summary of the client's performance status and the impact of the challenges they are experiencing on executing their functional activities. So this is where, when we talk about that the numbers don't lie, but do they tell the story? Do they tell the story of what's really happening and what's going on with this athlete? And what I have found is that this is one of the most critical parts of the assessment. And we all do this in some form or fashion, but what I'm going to show you today is how you really make it more specific to concussion. And you should be able to take this in any area that you work in.